U sklopu serijala Tribina Europa danas, koju organizuje Uprava za vanjske poslove i dijasporu Rijaseta Islamske zajednice u Bosni i Hercegovini, u posjeti Sarajevu nedavno je boravio profesor Matthias Rohe, istaknuti stručnjak za pravo i islam u Evropi. Tokom boravka u glavnom gradu Bosne i Hercegovine, u predavanju naslovljenom Akomodacija islama i muslimana u Evropi i Njemačkoj, profesor Rohe govorio je o položaju muslimana i muslimanskih zajednica u evropskim okvirima. U intervju za BHT1 ovaj stručnjak svjetskog renomea govori o antimuslimanskom rasizmu u Njemačkoj, unutar evropskim razlikama u prihvaćenosti islama i muslimana, te ističe važnost doprinosa koji Evropi daju muslimani Bosne i Hercegovine, naglašavajući višestoljetno iskustvo islama koji žive.
Professor, thank you very much for allocating your time in what is quite a busy Sarajevo schedule for you in the past few days, and talking to us ahead of your return to Germany.
It's my honor and my pleasure. Thank you.
I think it would be appropriate to start by asking you what inspired you to really delve deep into the world of Islam and Islamic law at the first place. You've become Europe and international wide recognized expert in those fields. What was the initial spark you had that led you this way?
Well, to keep a long story short, I had my personal experiences with the Middle East in the age of 8. When I was a small boy, my father was an engineer and he was responsible for huge construction sites in Turkey, in Saudi Arabia and other places. So I had this personal experience for being there and I was fascinated. It was Eastern Turkey, which was another world for me. And I remember in the age of 11, my father went to Saudi Arabia and he asked us kids, what kind of gifts do you want from me? And I asked him to bring me a carpet and a Quran. So in the age of 11, I started writing down these letters. I couldn't read Arabic at that time, but I was still fascinated. I started to have courses in Arabic as a pupil. After having finished school, I was working as a cook in Saudi Arabia with a German company for a couple of months, traveling around and there for a couple of months, for example, to Damascus, to Syria, where I later then studied at the Faculty of Law. So it was step by step. I was simply fascinated. And what I learned is, despite all the cultural differences we are facing, we have so much in common in the most important fields of human life. And so I lost the kind of fear many people or some people have towards this region, towards the religion. I saw this is people like me anyway. We all want to have a decent life. We all want to have our families, to have a better future for our children. And I think this is so important. This is my experience. Mm-hmm. And this is why then I studied law and Islamic sciences. And now I can bring these two fields together by comparative law, for example.
Is there a fear of Islam and Muslims in Europe nowadays and in a specific context in Germany?
It is very widespread, unfortunately. I mean, there are some historical reasons. I mean, we had our unfriendly times from time to time, which is not forgotten. What is mostly forgotten is the rich cultural exchange we had over centuries between the so-called Islamic world and the West. But more in present times, I would say there was a big shift in the perception of Islam, and you can precisely date that with 9/11. Before that, people migrating to Europe, for example, being Muslims or not, they were immigrants. They were foreigners, maybe they were Turks, they were Arabs. And since 9/11, they are Muslims. So every problem linked with immigration, and there are some problems, are now Islamized as it concerns Muslims. So everything which is happening is in a way attributed to Islam. People have a perception of Islam of being violent, and you see this. I mean, there is extremism, a very small percentage, but more and more people would associate Islam with this kind of violence, and that's what we have to counter and to inform people that this is not the truth. I mean, there is this extremism. We shouldn't shy away from pointing at these problems. But we shouldn't forget that the vast majority of Muslims are not supporting that, are, to the contrary, fitting very well into European societies. But this is, in a way, being lost in the public mindset.
Mm-hmm. If we observe a European continent in a stratospheric overview, north, center, south, would you say that there are differences in the way, regional differences, how Islam is being accommodated and accepted in those zones of European continent?
It might be regional, but I think the differences are on different levels. Mm-hmm. I think if we are talking about accommodation of Muslims, of Islam in Europe, there is a common ground regarding the legal sphere, because we have the European, Convention on Human Rights, the European Convention, which grants far-reaching freedom of religion everywhere. So we have this common legal ground. We have some differences indeed. Let's say, for example, between France and Germany and Austria, we have this laicist system in France, where religion since the 19th century was more and more perceived to be a threat for politics, for the state. Mm-hmm. So the state tried to do away with religion in public space to a far extent. Whereas the experience in Germany, for example, was totally opposite. We saw that the state itself can turn to become an instrument of the grossest injustice you can imagine during the Nazi time. And so we perceive more religion to possibly contribute to a human living together, preserving human rights, human dignity. So we have a positive attitude towards religions. We call it a religiously open secularity, which enables Muslim much more to accommodate. But I think the bigger differences are in the background of the respective Muslim communities within these countries, from a socio-economic view, from an educational background, because these are, I think, the core factors of accommodation. If you are well educated, if you have access to the labor market, if you have what we call social capital, you will not face too many problems to accommodate. Whereas those who don't have this education, who don't have the access to public opinion, etc., they have a hard life and a hard job to accommodate. So there are more these differences. And last but not least, there are different attitudes within, let's say, majority societies towards immigration in general. Mm-hmm. So you have countries where immigration is more and more perceived to be a richness, an advantage for the country as a whole. And after a long development, I would say Germany counts among these countries now. We are used to have this immigration and live together and accommodate, whereas in other parts of Europe, for example, let's say Hungary or other countries, there is no such experience and there is a lot of xenophobia. So these are differences in, let's say, social psychology. Mm-hmm.
Our viewers should be aware of the fact that you were actually commissioned as an expert in a group which was formed upon the German government announcement after what was allocated and defined as a far-right attack in Hanau, February 2022, with I think 9 people who were brutally murdered. You have submitted along other colleagues, experts, a 400 pages long report, which was published in last year. Did that report confirm there is what is called in German Islamfeindlichkeit in the society, or did it give a new perspectives of maybe that to be a too harsh of a definition?
Unfortunately, it's not too harsh. So we do have a widespread anti-Muslim sentiment in German society, sometimes also in German institutions. That's simply the truth. These are the facts. And we have been looking in several fields, in education, in media, in administration, judiciary, etc., politics, how are the debates. I mean, it's not one-sided. There are many people who would support Muslims, who would support them to obtain their rights, to disorganized, etc. But nevertheless, we have to admit that there are structural problems, indeed widespread problems. Mainly, there is a widespread fear of Islam as such, which is perceived in a very monolithic way. So Islam is the Islam of Saudi Arabia, is the Islam of Iran, is perceived to be violent, is perceived to oppress women, to be hostile to the other religions, etc., etc. So the more traditionalist or even extremist sides of Islam are taken to be Islam as a whole. Interestingly, for example, there were polls in Austria a couple of years ago. The non-Muslim majority was asked, do you have problems with your Muslim neighbors? No, a very small percentage said, yes, we are facing problems. 95, 90%, no, we have good friendly relations. Problems at the working place? No, only tiny minorities who affirmed that there would be problems. At the end, people were asked, are you afraid that the presence of Islam in the country will have a negative impact on the future? A two-thirds majority affirms that and says yes. So it's an abstract fear of Islam because this picture of Islam is very one-sided. So this is the historical thing, the siege of Vienna, etc., etc., all these inimical events in the past, plus the problems from migration. But in fact, it's not directed against the persons. Maybe a last example, there was this polls in Switzerland in 2004, if I remember right, on the ban of minarets. No, 4 minarets have been erected in Switzerland so far at that time. And the Swiss Schweizer Volkspartei, the Swiss People's Party, a right-wing party, launched these polls, and everyone expected people will reject it because it's not really an issue. 4 minarets or 10 minarets, Switzerland can cope with that. And everyone was surprised that they won this referendum, and now there is this ban. And there were polls afterwards among the population, among those who voted against the minarets, and the majority said, we have no issue with the minarets at all. We wanted to express our opinion that we have too much foreigners in our country. So you see, Islam or Muslims are only taken as a symbol representing other issues in society. So in a way, they have the role of the scapegoat from time to time.
And the world of media, is it helping or making things worse? In a different report, you were actually also appointed to analyze German media reports about Islam and Muslims. You have noted a strong focus on the violence and conflict issues.
I mean, we should differentiate. There are really good journalists and good media who try to really find a balanced approach, not denying the problems which exist, but also making aware of the very much positive sides in peaceful coexistence. Nevertheless, indeed, we found, and this is not only a result of research in Germany, but also in other countries, that there is a strong focus on the problematic issues, on violence, on honor crimes, whether this is Islamic or not. I would say this is a cultural issue much more than a religious one, since we see that among Christians, among Yazidis, among others, unfortunately the same things are happening. So it's a cultural, patriarchal issue, but very often it's attributed to Islam. And so indeed we have this strong focus. And even worse, it's not only the news, it's not only the kind of information, but it's also films. We saw, for the first time, I think, worldwide, we had an analysis of ordinary films where very often Muslims were depicted as the brutal ones. If you see a woman with a headscarf, this symbolizes a ghetto of people living separate from others, etc. So you have this negative picture outside of a, let's say, factual political context. It's entertainment, but still this entertainment produces pictures and produces some impressions of a religion. You have the same problem in school curricula or in school books, where very often only the inimical encounters in the past are an issue, or the problems of violence, the problems of integration. Very, very rarely you have the many positive examples which we are facing in our daily lives, because usually people are facing no problems or smaller problems. So the problematic issues are much exaggerated. And even in institutions, we don't have enough Muslims who could raise their voice from inside, who are heard there. We have to work, and we are working on that. So equal treatment, a fair access to posts, etc. The situation is improving. And we have a lot of good practice examples always. If I may only mention, for example, we have now Islamic religious instruction in our public schools, confessional instruction, which was set up since 20 years. Not in all of them, unfortunately, but it's more and more, it's increasing. We have Islamic theology now in our universities, including mine. So we are setting up, or Muslims are setting up, and they are supported in that, in building an infrastructure of an authentic Islam fitting into the framework of a secular environment. And there, I think the Bosnian experience comes into the play, on the play field, because you have such a rich heritage. I mean, it's a hidden treasure now for many in Europe, that you have this long-lasting experience of formulating your religious life within a secular environment, which fits together. I mean, you have all the theologians who could prove that Islam does not claim political superiority, but it is a kind of ethical guidance for people they could follow, which would fall under the freedom of religion, and which would very much fit into the European framework. So I would very much wish that this Bosnian voice would be more heard, more hearable in the European public, because in a way, may I say so, you can demonstrate the friendly face of Islam.
Oh, that's an idea and food for thought for Bosnian diaspora in German-speaking countries and in Europe. How is the situation when it comes to this overall perception of Islam when we talk about social networks? You have also delved into analyzing that, where, according to you, there is a toxic discourse space. So the situation is not as good or as we hoped it would be.
It is really toxic. I mean, the social media in general tend to open space for extremism of all kinds. I mean, these algorithms which lead to the emergence of these opinion bubbles. So people, once they have been looking into extremist websites, they get offers from others, etc., etc. You have this vicious circle. You have it on the right wing, you have it on the left wing extremism, and you have it on anti-Muslim hatred as well. So people dare to utter things in the internet which they would never dare to utter face to face with other people. I mean, we have a German politician, Renate Künast, from the Green Party, who was severely and very, very badly attacked in the internet. And sometimes you can follow who was the person who sent this message. And from time to time, she visited these people and asked them face to face, what did you think? Why did you do so? And these people were so much ashamed about what they have been doing in personal contact. But it's such an easy mean of uttering everything and anything, and that's what people are doing. So it's really toxic. There are other examples. More positive example, in Instagram, for example, where we can see that Muslim voices, Muslim agency is emerging, though they counteract to a certain extent to this propaganda. But we are facing the same problems on the Muslim extremist side, by the way. I mean, the Salafi Wahhabi extremism is extremely strong in the internet. I mean, the highest hierarchy, if I may say so, for the younger generation, especially worldwide, is Sheikh Google. So young people, very often, they just try to find their solution, their answers in the internet, and very often they get extremist answers. And this is what we have to counteract. And there, Muslim organizations come into the play. Because I think it is a very important task for them to offer authentic Islamic answers to the questions these young people have, but in a non-extremist way, and to convince them on a sound basis. I mean, very often these extremists don't have a clue about their religion. They are religiously illiterate, but they are very much convinced that they know what God wants. So I think it is very important to open spaces for this true Islam and this true Islamic tradition and religion, and there could be done much more, I think, in the internet than until now.
Regulation of internet, do you think, especially hate speech, should be, you've mentioned that there is initiative on European level, that there is a really need and a system to be implemented. Is it the way to regulate, the way to put it in a context of hate speech which would limit its capabilities and platforms?
I mean, we are in dire need of these regulations worldwide, and I think European Union possibly is going to start with it. But we shouldn't overestimate the possibilities. I mean, maybe we will be able to reduce the worst examples and excesses, but probably it is more important to try to convince people. I mean, at the end, it's civil society, by the support of politics, where opinions are created in an open, vivid debate in public or within some circles. And I think this is more needed. If you restrict, if you forbid something, the mindset is still there. Being a lawyer, I know the limits of the law. I mean, we do need the law to preserve some basic rules which have to be preserved, even by criminal law then. But the most important task, I think, is making people convinced that we have to have a peaceful coexistence, that we ought to find the common ground we are living on, and to cope peacefully with the differences we are facing. I mean, there are differences, there are different opinions, but we should all be united in the conviction that we have to peacefully deal with these differences. And this is what is the duty of civil society at the end. And this is why I would say giving people the possibility to encounter. I think this is first and foremost the importance. Bring them together. Bring young people together, make summer schools, make joint holiday offers where they can spend a week, 2 weeks together, and they will see that they are facing the very same problems. Who am I? What is my place in this society in the future? How do I plan my future? Can I have a family, etc., etc.? And if these people find together, I think a lot will be won. Give me one example. The police in the German city in southern Germany try to bring together people from police staff and people from Muslim organizations. 50 police people, 50 Muslims. They gathered in a room. And at a sudden, the police people were sitting on the left, the Muslims sitting on the right. So this kind of separation. Yeah. And then they had a very good moderator. And the moderator said, please, can you join one by one for 20 minutes and discuss with each other. Not discuss what are the problems we have with each other, but the question of what makes me happy in my life. And after these 20 minutes, they were in a way friends. They discovered that they are very same to many respects. So I think the older I am getting, the more I am of the conviction that personal trust is the most needed, and personal trust is created by personal encounters, and that's what we should support and enforce.
Not long ago, I had a pleasure to interview General Secretary of Islamic World League here, who was a guest at the conference organized in Sarajevo, and they have in their portfolio a very significant portion dedicated to fighting the radicalism in a thought and in practice. And he told me that education is the key. Would you agree?
Yes, I mean, creating trust between people has two sides. It's a kind of cognitive trust, and cognitive trust is very much related to education. We have to know what is Islam, what is secularism, what is Christianity, what is atheism, etc. And indeed, education is crucial. It is crucial. But I wouldn't underestimate the effective side of building trust. And the effective side is not that much education. It's very much more this simple encounter in daily life. If we have these constant encounters in daily life, people will figure out that the other is not really different in major aspects, in the most crucial aspects of living together in society. So we should have a look at both. On education, yes, it is of crucial importance, I wouldn't deny that, but also on this enabling more and more encounter. And not only, I would say, on the religious level. I mean, I highly appreciate interreligious dialogue, and I'm involved in that since decades. But I would also say that there are many Muslims or Christians or atheists, professionals in all sorts of grouping and interests, fans of football or professional meetings, etc. And there also, once people are realizing that, okay, this is a Muslim person, this is a Christian person, but on a professional level, we find together and we have common experiences and common interests, you can also work together there. So we shouldn't restrict these encounters to the religious level, but we should enforce them in a way on all sorts of social levels, and especially on the local level. Still, people are living together on the local level. And we should encourage all kinds of initiatives where people can come together on this level, because people are supporting themselves on this level. Just let me give the example of building mosques in Germany. We have now more than 2,500 being built during the last 40 years around. Sometimes only in some old factory buildings, but some very representative ones, and this is an ongoing procedure. Very normal. We have a Muslim community or communities of 5.5 million people from all over the world. So it's nothing but natural that they are developing a religious infrastructure. There are very different experiences in building mosques with minarets in different towns, depending on how the local actors are cooperating or are opposing each other. So this kind of local contact where you can find your allies who would support minorities, for example. And there I come to a really crucial point regarding the European Union. We claim to be a union under the rule of law, granting human rights. We are secular, which means the state has to be neutral towards religions and to treat them equally. So on this level, Muslim accommodation should be a normality. And it is a kind of litmus test that this is realized in practice. So it's not only for Muslims themselves, it's for all of us, that if we want to stay credible, we have to support these minorities to get their fair participation in European societies, in European institutions. It's for them, especially, but it's for all of us. Otherwise, we would lose our credibility. The rule of law is living from daily experience, from experience in daily life. Once it is not experienced in daily life, it's a sheet of paper which will be ignored. And so, indeed, I think it should be a common force to grant this improvement of accommodation. But I think that this message has arrived, at least in my country, in some others as well, the higher political circles. So everyone knows now that we really have to offer something, that we have to be self-critical within our own institutions. We have now inquiries whether there is Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred within the institutions. Where are the difficulties? Where can we improve that? Where can we, for example, offer trainings for professionals to deal with these issues of anti-Muslim racism, of Islamophobia, of xenophobia, etc. So I think there is much more awareness of these problems that we had 20 years ago, but still there is broad space to the better.
Interesting, you mentioned rule of law. 2 weeks ago, or even less, all international media did transfer a quote by a very high-ranking UN official, I think, who said in a situation that we have now in Gaza, international rule of law is actually about to collapse, or is collapsing. We cannot control the world affairs. They will evolve and develop in their own pace and in their own dynamics. But do you see situation in the Middle East, Gaza situation at the very moment, as another deteriorating factor when it comes to xenophobia? Both anti-Semitism, anti-Islamic movements might arise as a direct echo of what is happening in the Middle East.
Definitely, unfortunately, yes. It has a very, very strong repercussion. I would think in Europe as a whole. We have been discussing that in a commission in Brussels run by the Commissioner on Anti-Muslim Hatred, especially in my country. We have a race of anti-Semitic attacks, and we have a race of Islamophobia, and especially there is a sentiment of, especially among Palestinians and Arabs, of not being heard. Their grief over the situation in Gaza not being heard. I mean, I don't know any person in Germany, Muslim person, who would in any way support these terrible terrorist attacks of Hamas. No single person. But many would say, please don't forget this extreme injustice which is also done against civilians in Gaza. I mean, they are suffering in a way. It is hard to imagine, I must very openly admit, that these are not crimes of war. I mean, Israel has all the rights to defend herself. And there is good reason for that, and I can totally understand it. And unfortunately, in these kinds of defense measures, civilians will suffer, and this is even covered by international law. But to a certain degree, the developments at the moment are really devastating. And the problem is in some European societies, including some universities, that an open debate on these issues is blocked. Because there is this suspicion, whether you, always people are told to take sides. And if you say, I can understand this, but we should also consider for a better future, not for a kind of reckoning, okay, there is injustice, there is injustice, at the end there is no injustice at all. No, injustice is adding up. That's what we should know. So one injustice cannot be counteracted by the other injustice. We have to stop injustices. And the debate at the moment is not easy, I would say. It's improving. We don't have enough information about the concrete situation, but what we know is if this does not end, this extreme violence does not end, there is no hope for a better future, for a peaceful future. What will happen with the children in Gaza now who are suffering this in 10 years, in 20 years? What will be their future? What will be their mindset? I mean, we will have to ask these questions to find solutions step by step. And I think the international community, of course, is now in charge of trying to find solutions, to exercise a certain kind of pressure on all sides to come out of this catastrophe.
If we do not act and react immediately on finding the common sense and common ground worldwide, do you think that Samuel Huntington's idea of clash of civilizations will come at its full realization worldwide?
I don't think so. I mean, the times have become more difficult than we expected. If you remember the 1990s, at least in Europe or in many parts of the West, the end of history. There was a book about Fukuyama. No, history didn't end. What we achieved, we lost to a certain extent now. Things have become more difficult, but still, there is the chance of globalization that more than ever in the past, we can encounter, we can exchange minds personally, by traveling, by working at other places, via the internet, etc. So we are more than ever one world. And we can find, I think, our allies in the sense of people who would wish to live peacefully together, who would find common ground, who would learn to live, to peacefully arrange their differences. And I think there are so many worldwide, all over the world, and many people know that it makes no sense to separate the world into ethnicities, into religions, etc. It's not feasible. It doesn't reflect reality. So yes, some parties and political parties, some representatives of media, etc., might exploit the situation. And I'm not too optimistic for the near future that we will come together in the way we would wish. But nevertheless, I think this Huntington theory has never proven to be realistic, and hopefully, and I think it will not in the future.
We have addressed our viewers here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Southeast Europe, in Germany. I'm convinced that Bosnian diaspora will follow this interview living in German-speaking countries. Who talks and who addresses the politicians? Who goes around and says, enough is enough, let us invest instead of weaponry, polarization into culture, getting to know each other, interfaith dialogue. There was, I think, the latest Urbi et Orbi message of Pope Francis. He actually quoted what is the annual intake countries and governments on annual basis invest in defense/weapons. Can we change the mindset of the leaders and their priorities?
I mean, to my opinion, it would suffice at the moment if they would invest enough into dialogue, into everything. I mean, to a certain extent, I can understand that defense has become a new issue. We wouldn't have expected, in many countries, I think, at least in Europe, we wouldn't have expected that a kind of imperialist aggression we are facing now in Ukraine would ever happen on European soil. So everyone is in a way shocked. And I can understand political movements who say, now we have to look more to our defense, especially the countries in Eastern Europe who have their long experience with this kind of Russian imperialism, have taught us that. So I do understand that we do invest in that. But nevertheless, on the basis of weapons, we will never find peace. We can stop war, we can stop the occupation of territories. But to create peace between people, we do need other measures. We do need other tools than weapons. And this is why it would be very wise to also invest in that, even if we have to take some debts for financing that. But I think on the political level, many people are indeed aware of the fact. And at least in my country, but I think in many others also, there is a strong sentiment within civil society that we should promote peace. And I do not aim now at these right-wing parties in Germany who say, let's make peace with the Russians on the expense of Ukraine. No, not at all. Not at all. This would be a kind of surrender, and we shouldn't go into their traps. But nevertheless, we should find means to much more improve the encounter of people. But I am, again, as old as I am, slightly optimistic. In my country now, millions of people went into the streets for peace, against these racist right-wing policies and sentiments, against the others, the othering of people from other countries, etc. So I think there is now a kind of move towards the better in public awareness that we have to really work on more peaceful living together, including, I would say, even this intricate situation, the debate on the terrorist attacks of Hamas and the situation in Israel and Gaza now. I think people are getting now a bit more realistic that we have to face the problems and that we have to find ways to reorganize the dialogue we have. And I myself, I am involved now in these days and weeks to bring people together from religious organizations. How can we deal with this intricate issue? We can certainly not resolve the conflict in Ukraine, nor the conflict in Israel and Gaza, but we can try to find ways, at least in our countries, to maintain our peaceful encounters and to defend ourselves against these extremists from all sides, so a kind of civil support of people of goodwill.
Immediately after this interview, you are headed to airport and back to Germany. this is your second visit to Bosnia and Herzegovina and Sarajevo. What were and still are the most dominant impressions you're leaving with and bringing back to Germany?
Well, the first is my impression since 2007. There is considerable progress visible to the better. What I also see is a kind of widespread disappointment regarding the possibility of becoming a member of the European Union. And I can understand that. I would very much encourage the European Union to find solutions to at least intensify the relations to Bosnia and Herzegovina on different levels. I mean, full membership in the European Union is a middle range goal, perhaps. I know that the German government is really interested in the membership due to the new political scenario, in a way. The tragedy in Ukraine, I think, has started a new thinking, a new step on within the EU on thinking how should we deal with these states in the Western Balkans? Should we improve their relations? Should we take them as members, or should we leave them to Russia or to other powers? So I think there is more interest than in the years after in finding political solutions, and I would really, really wish that we come forward to that. I think I take the impression with me. Aside that it's such a very, very friendly people. They are perfect hosts here. It's a marvelous nature. It's a rich culture. And Bosnian Islam, the Islamic experience of Bosnia, really would be a very important part of European culture, which should be made much more visible than it is already, because you have your experiences from 150 years now living in a secular state with a non-Muslim majority, how to cope with that. You have developed a kind of theology, building bridges between the systems, finding common solutions, finding common ground, and I think this is the message which European societies as a whole, but also Muslims within Europe, are in dire need of. So in a way you can really play an important role in the emergence, in the organization of Muslim, with a view of even better accommodation of Islam as a whole within Europe, and that's what I would wish.
Is Bosnian Islam something you would like to investigate further in your academic daily life?
For sure. For sure.
Is there a book you're currently working on?
I'm writing an essay, at least, on that, and we are thinking about organizing a summer school exchange with Sarajevo, etc. So indeed, I myself, I'm really impressed. Unfortunately, I don't speak the Bosnian language, which is really a pity. But fortunately, there are some translations of important works, and this would also make sense if it is possible to translate more of this rich intellectual heritage into English or even into German, simply to make at least academia aware of this, because to a certain extent academia has no political power, but can to a certain extent influence the politicians by giving them sound information about developments or experiences which they are still not aware of.
Professor Rohe, thank you very much, and on behalf of Religious Affairs Department and the whole team for allocating your time and being our guest in Medias Res interview format. I wish you all the best, and I'm convinced that we will meet again in Sarajevo to discuss this and many other topics of your, but also interest of the wider public.
Mashallah. And thank you for your interest.
Vidimo se.